Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The hour is 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order the meeting of the Laconia City Council scheduled for this hour for August 13, 2018. We'll begin our meeting tonight, as always, with a salute to our American flag. I would ask that you please rise and join Councilor David Bounds in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the record, we'll note that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by our city clerk, Cheryl Hebert, and I would ask that she please call the roll.
Councilor Cheney?
Here.
Councilor Bounds?
Here.
Councilor Littman?
Present.
Councilor Haynes?
Here.
Councilor Hamel?
Present.
Councilor Hosmer?
Here.
Mayor England?
Here. Let the record show that all 6 councilors are present this evening, and a quorum is present. Also note for the record that the city council is joined at the front table tonight by city manager Scott Myers and by the city finance officer Donna Woodeman. I'm going to start tonight's meeting with a proclamation presentation. I'll come around front for that. It is the council's pleasure tonight to formally recognize and thank on behalf of all the residents of Laconia the people who were at the heart of the Celebrate Laconia 125th anniversary celebration. Okay, we've had with a number of events dating back to August of last year. I have a proclamation to read that contains several names, and at the end of reading this proclamation, I'm going to make the presentation of this presentation of the proclamation itself to the current chair, or I'm not sure who's chair at the moment, but the first chair and the second chair, I'll refer to them, but we'll do it simultaneously. They can keep for the records, but we're also going to name a bunch of several other people as well who deserve special thanks for their efforts. And I would ask that when I finish reading the proclamation, that you come up and join me up here. And do we have someone take a picture of this? Do you have a camera with you? Okay, thank you. All right, proclamation. Whereas Celebrate Laconia is a nonprofit organization created by a group of like-minded community members and business owners who love Laconia, and whereas the group's focus is to celebrate the past, present, and future of our city and to encourage and stimulate its cultural and economic development, and whereas the Celebrate Laconia volunteer group has worked tirelessly and enthusiastically over the past year to bring the community together by organizing events such as the 125th Passenger Station Anniversary Celebration, Laconia Vibe, the Miss Laconia 125th Scholarship Pageant, Manifest 125th Birthday Celebration, and most recently, the spectacular 125th Anniversary Extravaganza. And whereas the city of Laconia owes a great deal of thanks and immense gratitude to the volunteer members of Celebrate Laconia, including Becky Geyer, who was the Party in the Park coordinator, Tony Felch, the parade coordinator, Chet Silly, master parade coordinator of many, many years, Jared Gilmet, incoming vice president, publicity chair, and souvenir booklet creator, Pam Clark, outgoing president and historical committee representatives, Alexandra Pelletier, treasurer and publicity committee member, Beth Sansucci, the incoming president and publicity committee member, and Linda Heaney, incoming secretary and Party in the Park community stage coordinator. And whereas the Laconia City Council, along with all City of Laconia residents, families, and friends, would like to express our sincere appreciation for the accomplishments Celebrate Laconia has made to foster pride in the city and to bring our community together. Therefore, I, Edward J. Engler, Mayor of the City of Laconia, do hereby proclaim Monday, August 13, 2018, as Celebrate Laconia Volunteer Appreciation Day. Thank you. So please see all of you in the back row back there. Please join me up here. Outgoing chairman, hi. Must be Alexander. Yes, nice to see you. Eric, good to see you. Chester, how are you?
All right. You always just call me that. Scott?
Tony, let me get in the middle or on the end here.
That's why I always put a video
Well, I'll go with you.
Sure.
Chet, you gotta get up in here where we can see you.
Oh, I don't want them to see, you know that.
Okay, we got everybody? Here, why don't you hold that? Thank you all.
And I'd just like to say thank you to City Manager, the departments that we worked with, Parks and Recreation, Department of Public Works. You've all been incredibly supportive, and there's no way we could have done this without you. So thank you so much.
So many familiar faces in that group to all of us, and for most of them, if not all of them, this is obviously not the first time they've done this on behalf of the city. And so, as the proclamation said, we're deeply and sincerely appreciative of their efforts. We're on to acceptance of minutes from previous meetings. Before us tonight were the minutes of our last meeting on the 23rd of July. Those minutes were distributed on the 27th by the clerk. No changes or corrections were submitted, so unless there are any at this moment, I'm going to declare the minutes to our July 23rd, 2018 meeting as being accepted as submitted. We have no consent and action items on the agenda tonight, so we are to citizen comments for matters not on the agenda. This is the appropriate place on the agenda tonight to accept comment from the public from anyone who would like to address the council on any matter that is not on tonight's agenda. Mr. Gallagher, welcome, sir.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the council for giving me a few minutes to introduce myself. My name is Brian Gallagher. I'm from the town of Samberton, and I wanted to come tonight to present myself to you as one of the three candidates running for the District 1 Belknap County Commissioner seat. It includes certainly the city of Laconia, the town of Samberton, where I've resided since 1986, and the neighboring town, New Hampton. Just quickly, to give you a little professional background, I have met some of you folks here at the council and other venues, but I've spent 30 years in public finance, including time for about a dozen years in the state finance office, 8 years up at the New Hampshire Supreme Court in the administrative office, and I was the business manager simultaneously for two large school districts in the southern tier, being the Windham School District and the Pelham School District. I've been a state representative and sat on the Ways and Means Committee, have co-sponsored actually some bills with former Senator Hosmer. I understand how the county budget works, having crafted it with some fellow legislators. And at the same time, I do understand how the county spending impacts the tax cap situation and challenges that the city works under. Been known to listen to reason and listen to different opinions. I believe that I have the ability to work with people from different parties, different philosophies, different points of view to achieve the results, which is the common good for all those that are being represented. Previous experience have been in town level, the county level, of course, and at the state. Fortunately, I enjoy the ability to be retired at this point in my life, so taking on an adventure like this, I do have the time to do it. You folks are certainly familiar with the folks that are in this particular primary race. There's the current commissioner who has served for 4 years, a former mayor who has served the city of Laconia, and myself. What is rather interesting is that the primary is 30 days out, and with that, because there's no representation on the opposite ballot, meaning the Democratic ballot, more than likely the person who prevails on September 11th would be the next representative as the District 1 Commissioner, representing the city of Laconia as well as the town of Samberton and New Hampton. What I can tell you is that I'm not a confrontational person. I do follow the law, having spent time in the Supreme Court and in the State House. And I guess, not to belabor it and take up too much of your time, I do have some handout material, with your permission, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to leave with your
leave with the clerk.
representative. And if there were a question, I'd be happy to entertain it. And if they're not, I'll be all set.
Okay, thank you for introducing yourself, or reintroducing yourself. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to address the council tonight on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda? Oh, okay, we'll move on. We have one interview tonight, and that is Roland Mayhew. Mr. Mayhew is seeking reappointment to a regular member position on the Zoning Board of Adjustment for a 3-year term expiring at the end of August 2021. Welcome, Mr. Mayhew. Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you very much. I first of all want to thank you, the board, for appointing me 2 years ago, because it's been a very interesting experience. I've enjoyed it. I think we have a good team working together on the Laconia Zoning Board, and I'd like to continue with that for another term. And I'm asking you tonight to appoint me for another term to Laconia Zoning Board of Adjustment. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
One quick one is, can you tell the clerk for the record what ward you live in?
Pardon me?
If you could tell the clerk what ward you live in, please?
Oh, Ward 6.
Any questions for Mr. Mayhew? Or comments? Okay, I guess not. We'll,
Thank you, Roland.
Thank you. Thank you for volunteering again, and as I'm sure you probably are aware, the election for this position will be held at our next meeting, and you're not required to attend that. Sure.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Roland.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any elections or nominations tonight, no communications, no public hearings for a change tonight. And we are already down to the mayor's report. And I have a couple of items that I would like to call everyone's attention to tonight. One, I'll say just very briefly, I believe the city manager tonight during his report is going to give us a report on the motorcycle week account fund and what our income stream and expense was mounted to at the last meeting. And one thing that I wanted to call your attention to at this point in time, especially to our 3 newest members who were not here a year ago, there's a new income stream in there that has not been the case before, and that was for the trademark rights to use the various trademarks that we registered that used to be under the name of Hot Leathers. And we negotiated last year a buyout settlement, if you will, with Hot Leathers to get those trademark rights assigned to the city as opposed to, so in the past what has happened was Hot Leathers had the trademark registration, and technically the money was collected in their name, although in actuality, it was actually collected by Charlie St. Clair of the Motorcycle Week Association, although the checks were made out to Hot Leathers. And then the deal, the contract that the Motorcycle Week Association had with Hot Leathers said that 70% of the money would be refunded, if you will, or donated back to the Motorcycle Week Association, and 30% would be kept by Hot Leathers, primarily to meet their ongoing expenses of paying their trademark attorney to keep up with things and whatnot and police the situation. So when we decided last year to attempt to get those trademark rights assigned to the city and to enter negotiations with Hot Leathers to do that, I made it very clear to the then members of the council that while the city would retain the legal rights to the names, that it was not my intent in introducing this proposal to change the financial arrangement, meaning that the net proceeds from collecting that was intended to go back to the Motorcycle Week Association. And so I wanted to make that clear, especially to the new members, that now, so we'll get to the specific numbers involved when we get to the city manager report here. We did have some expenses, which I think in legally getting this whole thing set up, so I think it's okay for us and perfectly acceptable for us to write a net check, if you will, to the Motorcycle Week Association after we take out our legal expenses and whatnot that we incurred in getting the trademark moved over to us. But I'm going to ask the council at the appropriate time tonight to make a motion to, I don't know if donate's the right word or how we would do that. We can tackle that at the time. But that the net proceeds from those trademark payments would be turned over to the Motorcycle Week Association to meet their ongoing expenses. The second thing tonight has to do with solar energy and the sale of solar energy. There is some of you, and I apologize up front, I made myself an extensive list of notes tonight for this part of the presentation, and then of course I left them at the office. So I don't have the notes in front of me, but I'll do the best I can as conveying what the issue is here. So a bill was passed by the legislature to extend what they call the net metering provision that allows solar operations to sell the net of power generated by their project back to the Eversources of the world and whatnot. And I'm far from an expert on this, so if anybody at the table needs to clean up my act a little bit here, please, please wade in at the appropriate time. But so this bill was passed by the legislature, and the governor was under considerable pressure on both sides to either sign or veto the bill once it got passed. And the governor ended up siding, if you will, with the Business and Industry Association, who was recommending a veto, and the governor vetoed the bill. So there's going to be an effort here next month to have the legislature override that veto to make this so-called net metering bill become law. And there is a considerable lobbying effort now centered in the Municipal Association and with member cities and towns and whatnot to get on board and trying to override this veto and recommending that the veto be overridden. And to that end, Mayor Tony Ginta of Franklin has organized an informal association of all the mayors of the 13 cities in New Hampshire to sign a document recommending that the legislature override the veto on behalf of the New Hampshire municipalities. And I'm told by Mayor Ginta that I'm the only mayor who has declined to sign that document. And I have supposedly they have the other 12 mayors lined up to do so. And when requested to do so by several different parties, including Mayor Ginta, I expressed my general support for the governor's position and for the Business and Industry Association position and said that I would not sign it. Most recently, I had a phone call from a lengthy discussion with a gentleman from New England Solar Garden, is that what it's called? The company that we recently entered into a contract with for the solar array, solar farm up at the old landfill. He was lobbying me again to sign it and giving his arguments and that sort of thing. So in the end, what I told that gentleman was that while I personally come down narrowly, because I don't think this is a black and white issue, at least it isn't to me. I think there are good arguments to be made on either side, and I just come down slightly, if you will, on the side of the governor and the Business Industry Association. But I told him that you know, since every other mayor in the state has signed on to this document, that if it was the will of the city council, that the city of Laconia's name be attached to this effort to override the governor's veto, that I would leave it up to the council, and if the consensus of the council was for us to sign on to that I would happily do so in the name of the council and overlook my own personal observations on this matter. So without lobbying, I will briefly say that I've done a fair amount of reading on this in the last couple of weeks, trying to understand the various arguments pro and con on this. And again, while I cannot pretend to be an expert on it, the issue, the plant that's been proposed for Laconia, the facility, was a 4.4 megawatt per year facility. Under current New Hampshire law, the limit for the net metering, as it's called, is 1 megawatt per year. In other words, if your plant generates 1 megawatt or less per year, the utility companies such as Eversource have to pay you for your excess capacity at wholesale rate, which is 8 cents what do you call it? Kilowatt hour. And so they want that bill extended to 5, from 1 to 5, meaning, again, that if they can generate, and ours is 4.4, and that's not an accident, that it's just under 5. And they're very, New England Solar Gardens, and I'm sure the rest of the people who are doing this are very upfront about it also, in the sense that they readily admit that if that bill doesn't get changed from 1 to 5, they're not going to build a 4.4 megawatt project in Laconia or Franklin or anywhere else. And the reason is simple, is because the investors behind these plants won't invest in the plants unless they're guaranteed a rate of return at wholesale electric prices rather than the market price. And so if that doesn't change from 1 to 5, they're not going to build a plant that's bigger than 1, because they want to be guaranteed their rate of return. And, you know, so if you're the governor and the Business Industry Association, what you're saying is that amounts to a subsidy that's going to be passed on to the ratepayers all over the state of New Hampshire, because they're going to be paying, the Eversources of the world are going to be forced to buy electricity at higher rates, and those costs are going to be passed on to the average everyday consumer. From a narrow interest standpoint, there's no question that municipalities in New Hampshire are going to benefit from having the higher limit, because the first place these companies are looking for, or first two places they're looking for, are large corporations that could put in their own farms, or municipalities that have surplus real estate, such as Laconia. And Tony is particularly interested in this in Franklin, because he's got 4 plants there that are on the drawing board and whatnot. We have 1, he has 4. And that's why he wants the tax revenue, obviously, or the income for the city of Franklin that this will generate. So there's no question, and I would have to admit this, that this would be, in the short run, if you will, good for New Hampshire municipalities and large companies who can afford to do this, because they will get the money, a good size, good check from these solar companies that are going to do this, if they can get that limit extended from 1 to 5 megawatts. I would argue that it's not good for New Hampshire consumers, because they're going to pay the price. We all are, as consumers, are going to pay the price for it. But certainly the cities, in terms of the city municipalities' bottom lines in the immediate future, if the veto is not overridden, and I want to be very upfront about this, it will, what were we promised? 80, 100,000, something like that?
In the land lease and the pilot agreements was around 45,000, and then additionally, there was a 1 cent per kilowatt hour rebate, which would probably come in at around $55,000.
So the gentleman I talked to at New England Solar Garden said, you know, if the governor's veto is not overridden, they won't do a 4.4 megawatt project here. It'll go back to under 1, and we could expect the income that we were expecting to be reduced by 80%. So if any of you would like to make a motion to direct the mayor to sign on to this letter, I would be happy to entertain that motion.
I'll make that motion.
Counselor Bounds makes the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it just for discussion.
Okay. Seconded by
Hamel.
Counselor Hamel. Thank you. Discussion. Counselor Lippman.
I'd like to direct a question to the manager. If I could. In terms of the contract and where that stands with the solar company at this point.
I spoke with a representative probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. They're doing their final due diligence with Eversource as far as being able to connect into the transmission line, which runs right through the property anyway, as being an appropriate way to feed into it. Once that gets completed and approved, they'll do their final, concurrently they're doing their final siting of where panels will go and what the exact amount of megawatts to be produced is. Then they'd be going both to DES for approval to build this on a closed landfill, which they've done in a number of communities in New England have done this. And then concurrently, they would be going through the planning board process here in Laconia for review. The likelihood is we could be completed with the process through the planning board probably by November. It probably is going to take a little bit longer getting through the state approval process. So in all likelihood, unless it was a very mild, late starting winter, they would be looking to start construction in the spring once conditions.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah. So in terms of the budget that we just passed, can you refresh our memory with respect to, is this part of what we had approved as a line item?
We did put an item in there, and we went fairly conservative, not knowing, number one, if the rebates were going to be there, and also not knowing if it was prorated based on when it got constructed and energy was being produced, or whether, as it turns out, it's going to be all up front. But we did count on $30,000 in revenue within our budget that was recently adopted.
Counselor Bounds?
Do you know, or does anybody know if anybody's done any kind of analytical analysis of what the impact would be to the consumer over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years? Has anybody made the argument, look, this is what's going to happen, your electrical rates, the average consumer's electrical rates are going to go up 2%, 5%, 10%? Anybody done that?
I haven't seen any studies that identified that.
No, I think the point that I would make and that others make is that we're already in New Hampshire and New England paying
A lot.
at least 50% more than the rest of the country for electricity already.
But I think the question also is, do we have the capacity to keep up with the demand over the next decade? And if we don't have the capacity in the state, then we're going to see an even steeper increase in some of these costs associated with it. That's, the flip side of that. So I don't disagree with you. I think that's one of the biggest concerns of the members of the BIA is the price of electricity in this state, and it may even be number one on their priorities. Let me disclose, and I'm not sure I have to abstain from voting on this. I have worked on behalf of the Clean Energy Collective, which supported this bill. So that's, for disclosure purposes.
Fair enough. As I said, I think there are terrific arguments on both sides. I am frustrated as an individual, not as the mayor, that, in my opinion, neither political party or any candidates thereof have been willing to tackle this issue because there are no easy solutions, and the tough solutions are gonna make people mad. And that's my opinion of it, as to why nothing is being done of significant if I was convinced that this bill was part of a significant, reasonable, long-term plan that was gonna work out for the best for consumers in the long run, I would be happy with that, but I'm not convinced that there's evidence to that, that we just keep piecemealing things on top of one another. You know, we want the electricity, but you know, we want lower power rates and whatnot, but we're not willing to invest in the means of doing it. This would be my opinion. Whether it be Northern Pass or whether it would be natural gas pipelines or whatever. We just can't seem to find a way to do the infrastructure in New Hampshire that would, in effect, lower our power rates. We're just not willing to bite the bullet and do it, and no politicians are willing to push it because they know it's going to make people mad. Councilor Hamel.
Scott, is the, if they only build the 1.45, whatever, does that mean the amount of money we get for the lease on the land will be reduced also?
Yes, there's a formula that they've used consistently with municipalities that they've proposed constructing these solar arrays in, and it all ties into the amount of megawatts that are proposed to be built. So if we went from a 4.4 down to a 1, which is the upper limit threshold right now, as the mayor said, in approximate dollars, we're being reduced by about 80%. So on the land lease and the pilot at 45,000, you know, 80% of a reduction of that would bring it down to $9,000 we would receive a year. And then the rebate goes away at that point, because I think the rebate is tied to the larger plant, not the smaller, you know, production of it. So it would be a relatively insignificant amount of.
You know, I don't blame anybody but myself for this, for maybe not paying as much of attention as I should have. But I don't recall this being a significant part of our deliberations when we were talking about this, that them building this plant was contingent upon this bill passing the legislature and being signed by the governor and becoming law.
I don't think it ever came up at all.
I don't remember it.
Well, we did talk a little bit, because I recall saying there also was the rebate component at 1 cent a kilowatt hour, that if it was generating would be on top of that, and we were trying to go conservative with the numbers and only talk about it being 45,000 and not potentially an additional 55,000 on top of that. So I think at least in some sense we talked about that, maybe not in a lot of detail.
But I also think, Mr. Mayor, it was unclear that the governor was going to veto this bill as well.
Yes.
There were indications all along that he was generally supportive of the principle.
I wouldn't argue with that.
So would it be, probably wouldn't be worthwhile to do the 1, and lease that whole piece of property for just the 1?
We probably would narrow down the scope of the land. If we wanted to go back, we'd revisit it and bring you in a revised agreement, and it wouldn't be for the whole 58 acres or whatever it is. It would just be for a small portion, and that way we could at least have options going forward.
And I suspect now that if this bill had said 10 megawatts, that what they're planning up there would be bigger than 4.4.
I don't know that. I know they've got to cite that, and if we've got some steep slopes up there where some of the panels cannot go, and there are other issues there besides that. So I don't specifically know the answer on how much bigger it would have been.
Okay. Councilor Lippman.
Just to go back to, you carried 30,000, we carried 30,000 in the current budget. In next year's budget, what was the amount that we would have been carrying?
At a minimum, it would have been the 45,000 for the land lease and the pilot, and then potentially an additional 55,000 on top of that. So if this got built and it came out with the final numbers at 4.4 megawatts, and the rebate was in play, next year's revenue number for that line item would have been probably $100,000, up from the 30,000 it was in this budget book.
And that nearly 100,000 would carry how many years?
It's a 20-year with 2 5-year options beyond that, so 30 years going out. It's not insignificant.
What were they planning to do when we were talking about the property on in the south end? How big a project was that? Was that a one?
That was even less than a one. I think that was going to generate something around $4,000, and we thought for $4,000 a year, there might be a better use for that parcel than locking it up for 20 or 30 years at $4,000 a year. We know it's got 2 feet of clean fill on it. It could be a slab, it could be city use of some kind, it could be a storage use. We just thought that it's already in an industrial zone. It's not really impacting any neighborhood abutters. The staff recommendation was not to lock that up for relatively small dollars. That was a 2-acre site, if I didn't mention, so again, proportionally, it wouldn't have handled as many panels.
Any other discussion? Councilor Little.
Mayor, we're talking about potentially $2 million 20-year impact of this item. In terms of what's your deadline in terms of having to, September 13th, I think, is the veto day.
I wasn't given a deadline, so I have no idea.
Well, the effort is going to go on
I
now.
won't be the least bit offended by this. I'm just, I have my own personal feelings, like I said, that come down on one side on this, of a close call, but I don't want to, and of course, the fact that I sign on to a letter doesn't mean the veto is going to get overridden either. I have no idea.
That's right.
I have no idea what the prospects for the veto are.
That's right. I guess my thought is that I know that there was a lot of speculation about what the governor would do and what he wouldn't do. I guess my thought is that I know what the impact is going to be on Laconia, and it's going to be significant, absent this net metering bill. I don't know, and nobody has formulated a cogent argument of what this trickle-down effect is going to be on the consumer. So,
Well, there is a number out there. It's not, I just can't tell you what it is. I mean, the Business Industry Association, do you remember, has quoted a number that it's going to cost consumers over 10 years or something. I don't remember what it is, but it was,
I wouldn't want to quote it and be wrong. So,
I don't know. But they did the Business Industry Association did somehow come up with a magic number as to what they thought it would cost consumers over a period
and
of
that's
time.
what it's worth. I mean, it's coming from them, so, but anyway, that's my thought.
Councilor Hamel.
Does Eversource have to buy back all the electricity generated there, or would that be, would in municipal buildings, they could say we use so much power and that'll be deducted from that, and then whatever's left over, or?
Some do have a purchase agreement to go in and use the electricity. That's done. In discussing with staff again, and we looked at some of our rates right now, and we actually just went out to bid on our electric rates through a broker process with a number of entities coming in. And, having to buy it at that fixed rate, we thought we could do slightly better in the open market, and it turned out that we did. So we did not get into that user agreement to use what we wanted and then, sell the rest back to the grid, so to speak. The rebate comes into how much is actually being used by municipal buildings. So within the municipality, that $55,000 I'm talking about would be an offset or a rebate for use within our buildings, all of our city buildings. And if we didn't use all of the kilowatts produced, then it could also go into the school department, the water department, the housing authority. I mean, we would find a way to support municipal or quasi-municipal operations and make sure we used all of that rebate coming. So that money, maybe 100% of it wouldn't come to the city, but a lion's share of that would.
Councilor Levin.
I'd like to make a suggestion that we table it to the next meeting and get some constituent input on it. I mean, I understand the trade-offs that you're outlining, which is, the long-term aspect of it versus, I think we also have a short-term aspect of it as making our budget work. So I guess I'd like to get some additional feedback, because I think there's still, that would be on the 27th, and the veto override vote, I think, is scheduled for the 13th of September.
All right, Councilor Lippman moves to table. Is there a second to that
Yes,
motion?
I'll second it.
Councilor Haynes seconds that motion.
So give me the time frame again for when the veto,
The veto vote is on the September 13th,
okay.
and we could
We're
take,
meeting on the 27th.
yeah, we meet again on the 27th of this month.
Oh, okay, so that's good time.
All right, we have a motion to table. All those in favor of tabling, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, the motion is tabled, and we'll take it up at our next meeting. Thank you for your indulgence. Committee reports. Let's see, I know the Finance Committee has a meeting later tonight, right?
Yes, we do.
After
Immediately
this meeting.
immediately following this.
We do have, by the way, counselors, a need for a non-public session after this was over, so there's 2 meetings after this one concludes. First, we'll do the non-public session, and then we'll adjourn this meeting, and then the Finance Committee will have a meeting at the end of that. Okay, any other committee business tonight? Liaison reports? Anybody? Okay, we are to citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. This is the appropriate place on the agenda tonight for anyone in our audience who wishes to address the council on any matter that is on tonight's agenda. Over here. If you could, when you come up, give us your name and what ward you live in or what town you live in, please.
My name is Pete Dearness. I live in Goffstown. I'm the owner-manager of the New England Southern Railroad, and I'm here just to speak very briefly. I hope that all the counselors have copies of the position paper, if you will, that I sent off this morning regarding the Wall Trail extension. I have no objection to the trail per se. We have a nice trail in Goffstown. I wish that years ago the railroad there could have survived, but this is a new era. Trails are okay. My position is that our concern is that both with respect to freight and the tourist potential on the line, that it'd be fine if somehow the committee can find a way to get the funding and to build a trail with the rail. We strongly object to any idea of taking up the rail. I think if you look through the position paper, you'll see that the New Hampshire DOT, state law and so forth, pretty much prohibits any such situation. I have not seen any document, but in 1982, when I came up here from Western Mass from another railroad project, I was told that the line, the Concord-Lincoln line, was purchased with federal funds, and that if at some point the line was no longer used and terminated and used for other purposes, that funding would have to be returned to the federal government. I know that has happened in several states where they've acquired these lines using federal funding. So that may or may not be an issue. But the fact is that our company holds, in another 10 days, it'll be 36 years, that we've been trying hard to develop freight operations. We've been successful on about 25, 30 miles of the line. We have several other projects. The mayor just mentioned the Northern Pass. That's now going to be litigated. Could be 6 months, it could be a year, but not unlike any new project, there's a lot of oppositions to pipelines, new roads, new rail lines, whatever. It's something that might happen. You've got the power plant down there at Bow that's basically burning the coal that's on site. And then after that, they may close the plant. It's a fairly modern plant, but it's built for coal. They have no plans to continue with coal. So the logical thing would be, okay, to use gas. Well, as some of you probably recall, the effort to bring a gas line across southern Vermont, southern New Hampshire towards Mass and Maine failed miserably. So that certainly is something that's going to be very difficult. So in closing, hopefully all you folks will have a chance to look over that position paper. The tourist railroad, of course, depends on having the track, obviously, and they own the other tourist railroad to the north. Our concern, and we've used it before several times, is losing the engine house and the locomotive repair facilities up at Lincoln. It's the only facility on the line, the 73 miles, that's capable of that. They do good work. They do contract work. Sometime in the next 3 weeks, they'll be shipping out several passenger coaches that they've refurbished for private companies elsewhere, specifically Connecticut and Western Mass. They also have a caboose that they've refurbished for the MBTA down in Boston. They've done other equipment for the MBTA. So that's a separate operation, but it's also owned by the Hobo Railroad, which has the tourist operations. Our operation currently is based in Canterbury. We just recently sent out to Michigan roughly a 70-car train loaded with military equipment for the National Guard. I'm kind of anxious of getting out of the meeting early because I'm going to be on a flight out of Pease to go and observe the live fire exercises out in Michigan tomorrow. So if there's any questions, again, I think our position paper is pretty clear in terms of our opposition is not against the extension of the trail. We're saying save your money, save your time, either find an alternate route, because I know there are objections and concerns. For instance, the drawbridge location, it's not a situation where you're going to be able to have the drawbridge up and, go up and down for a trail. They already have difficulties just doing it for the boats. So with that, any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. And
Councilor Lippman has a question.
Could you just describe your connection to the current rail? You were saying your company versus Hobo Railroad. Just trying to understand better what your...
Oh, okay. In 1982, we leased the entire lease from the state of New Hampshire. At that time, the Hobo Railroad did not exist. We started the Winnipesaukee Railroad. It was called the Winnipesaukee Railroad. And I and a partner, it was kind of a cash business. The freight business is completely different. My expertise is in the freight. And ultimately, Ben Clark's dad started the Hobo Railroad in Lincoln. And then later on, they took over the lease that we had for the Winnipesaukee. We work very closely together. There's really no competition. It's a very, between Ben and I, we work together on most different things. But we handle any of his freight inbound or outbound. Unfortunately, there's not a lot. We don't get the National Guard train but every 2 or 3 years, but we currently, we were ready to receive 4 transformers just probably in another 2 months to ship up over to Franklin. That was going to go over rail. But that would not have affected this particular segment. But in talking with them, we were also starting to develop rates for construction mats, big log mats that they use out in the National Forest and other wetlands. There was a possibility for moving steel for the towers, cable more likely. When we did look into the steel, it's going to be manufactured directly north in Canada. So in all likelihood, that'll probably be trucked down, at least for the upper third of the line. That's assuming that the Northern Pass does get passed. That's a big question there. So I'm the owner-manager. Again, we work very close together. I've talked with Ben about this and the Rail Bureau, who is our landlord, basically. And our lease, his current lease expires in a couple of years, ours in about 2 years later. And we both have a provision, as do the other 3 state-owned operations up in Conway and up in North Stratford and down in Milford. They all have the same contract that permits we have to notify the state 1 year before our term expires that we're interested in renewing our lease. And it's almost a given that it'll be renewed. They keep that language in there so that if there's some issue that the state is having with any of the railroads or collectively, and they want to change the language so that all of the contracts are the same. That's pretty much it. So.
Would I be correct in stating, as I did in a letter to the Department of Transportation late last year, that yours or the the Clark operation do not have a unilateral right to extend that lease?
When you say a unilateral, in other words, that it's given,
Meaning that the state has to sign off on it as well. The executive council has to approve it.
that's correct. And we've had five leases so far. So as long as you're, we submit every quarter we submit a marketing report, maintenance report, traffic report, all of the railroads do. We pay the state a percentage of our freight revenue, which is different in terms of the number for
Can
the
you tell us what the
passenger.
income the state gets from your lease now per year?
Our particular operation, probably somewhere around $4,000, something like that.
How much?
$4,000.
$4,000.
But we maintain the track, which is a couple $100,000 or more some years. And Mr. Clark's operation, and as I said before, it's a cash operation, and they're probably 30 or 40,000, or even probably more. I know Conway Scenic
think
also.
You're talking about the net the state gets, you mean?
Yes.
I think it's closer to 100.
Yeah,
You
it
get
could-
10% of the ticket revenue,
Yep.
which is
And Conway Scenic is even
near
more than that.
$90,000 a year, so that
Right.
presumes they sell, over the whole line, that they sell something just short of $1 million of ticket sales.
Yep.
So yours is 4,000 and theirs is 90,000.
That number would change rather dramatically. It was considerably higher before. We used to operate the track from Concord down to, Manchester.
Now, you say you're spending $200,000 a year fixing track?
Yeah, when we submit our quarterly report for maintenance, and I tally up our expenses, and then I put on the
So how
report
much
what
did you
our
spend- How
revenue
much did you
is.
spend in Laconia?
Pardon?
How much did you spend in Laconia?
We only maintain currently to the Belmont line. If we were to operate trains up here, we would pay a proportional amount with Ben Clark based on tonnage.
So north of Belmont, you don't spend anything?
Not at the present, well, we cut brush and some other things 2 years ago, but this last year, no. We're concentrated on getting ready for the next
So
military
how
train.
do you decide between yourself and the Clark operation who pays for maintenance?
Well, currently, from the Belmont line, anything up through there, he pays that in its entirety. And as long as he puts at least 20%
So
of
when you
his
say
revenue.
Belmont line, you mean between Belmont and Tilton? Or
Right, Lockmere.
Okay.
Where
So
the bridge
anything
is.
south of Lockmere, you pay for.
That's
Anything
correct.
north of Lockmere, he pays for.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to address the council tonight on a matter that is on tonight's agenda? Mr. Beadle.
Good evening, everybody. I'm not sure exactly where to start or how much time I have, but I guess you could go back 150 years to figure out why did they put this thing in here. Now, I'm not a historian, and I wasn't around then, but I believe they put in this railroad corridor for economic development. And if you look at the state of the railroad corridor now, with the exception, of course, the tourist train, there's not a lot happening out there. And we're spending considerable amounts of money, considerable more, building a bike path recreation trail, which can have a dramatic impact on our community. We're building that at close to $1 million a mile, where we might be able to reduce the cost on that probably 80% anyway. Now, I've got a lot of different thoughts here, but I do think that there's a motion that's going to be made, and I do think that there should be a public hearing on this, but I think the public hearing should occur after the study is done, so we have some good information and not your WOW Trail representative telling what he thinks is the case here. I think we have an opportunity to change the course of things in Laconia by getting this trail up to the weirs. You know, we have a nice trail. It's 4.5 miles. I regularly see people coming from around New Hampshire to use the trail. I know that it's making an economic impact already, but it's new, it's young, and it's still only 4.5 miles. If you connect this up to Weirs Beach and you bring a 10-mile trail or longer, because we want to go in the other direction towards Belmont and Tilton, we'll be bringing a lot of customers, a lot of new people, a lot of new faces up to the Weirs Beach who will be using the train, who will be riding the boat, who will be spending money at the Weirs. It'll be an incredible amenity, incredible ride up Paugus Bay from Laconia. So I encourage you to have this study completed and look at the difference, and not just in cost of building it. It's not just a cost issue. It's the trail itself. It's having a trail that is kind of the way we want to build the Colonial Theater, that it's built right and it has some wow factor to it when people come here, that they're not out on the roadways, that they're off the roads alongside the lake. I can tell you that if we get up to the Weirs, there will be no trail that compares to this trail in New Hampshire. You'll have to go to Cape Cod, to the Cape Cod Rail Trail, or maybe the Burlington Trail to see anything like this. This will be a real destination for people throughout New Hampshire, throughout New England, to come here to ride this and experience it. So I encourage you to proceed with the study, and I do know it'll be, I've talked to Ben Clark. I have not talked to this gentleman here. I know it presents issues for them, but I also know that there are many tourist trains in the country that have been operating successfully for decades with an interrupted line. Now, I can't say that's true for freight, and getting freight up through an interrupted line, you won't, but, you know, you really have to ask the question where we want to go here. Are we going to have freight trains coming through Laconia? I guess I would take some questions. There's many things I could go on with here, but if you have any questions, or I'll sit down.
Any questions for Mr. Beadle?
Thank you.
Outstanding. All right, thank you. Anyone else wish to address the council tonight on a matter that is on tonight's agenda? Mr. Mayu.
Yes, my name is Richard Mayu. I own Aqua Marina. I wasn't going to speak tonight. I don't have anything prepared. However, I've been listening. One of our biggest problems is taxes in Laconia. They're high. Our schools need to be improved. And we're not getting people coming into Laconia. We've actually gone downhill. If you look at the population, it used to be 18,000. We're down around 15,000, 16,000. If you want to increase your tax base, you have to use what's given to us by God. We have this lake in front of us that everybody from Boston, Long Island, New York, they all come up here to see this lake, to be on it. That's your value. That's your base. You need to use the lake. And if you don't use the lake and you have a train going by with a 66-foot wide easement that's disrupting businesses, I would like to build a hotel, an extended stay on my property. How can I do that with the train whistling, blowing daily, so loud you can't stand it, and sometimes up to 11 o'clock at night? So how are you supposed to make a profit if you have a train blowing a whistle right in your backyard for a hotel? And I've talked to several other people. They've traveled all over the world. If you read articles like Colorado, they put in 350 miles of WOW trail. and you listen to the people who have it, and they say, it's the best thing that ever happened. We ride our bike to work, we enjoy it, we take our families, we push baby carriages, you jog, you run. Laconia pays taxes. All of you here pay taxes. However, we don't get to use that quarter, where we don't get 10 cents out of it, as far as I know. Nothing. As a taxpayer, I'd like to be able to use it. And I'm sure that everybody in Laconia would like to use it, have their children use it. It's the way to go. If you want Laconia to improve, you have to be progressive. And lots of businesses are cut in half by the train. If you turn it into Wild Trail, the value of the properties are all going to go up. It's a proven fact. You can read study after study. And I don't know why nobody would want to do it. I've asked many people, and they say it's a no-brainer. How can you possibly not take advantage of it? It's your property along the lake is surrounded by the tracks. So if somebody's going to build a hotel, build a nice home, they're not going to want a train in their backyard. They're going to go to Wolfboro, they're going to go Meredith, they're going to go to any other town but Laconia. So you're losing a large base of taxes. Because who wants to pay that with a train in your backyard? There's safety. I see kids playing on the tracks every day, and it's dangerous. If you have a Wild Trail and the tracks next to it, and you put a fence down the middle, like they're proposing around Southdown, we have an intersection at our marina. The kids don't want to go down that path, they want to go down the railroad tracks. So when they get off close to Lookoff Rock, where are they going to go? If a train comes, they're going to end up jumping in the lake or get hit, because they're not going to be on the Wild Trail, they're going to be walking on the tracks. My theory, and it's only mine, I think the train should go. I think we should hire an engineer. Maybe there's a way that you can maintain the tracks and put the asphalt and the Wild Trail over it, and have something that in the future, if there's ever an emergency or something where they need to use the tracks again, they're able to pick up a rubber section or something so that the trail is flat and everyone can use it. We're throwing money away. We need help to improve Laconia. We really do. And I have 6 children, 13 grandchildren, and counting. Because of the school systems, one of my sons has an autistic child. He was not able to get any help here, so he had to leave Laconia and move back to Bedford, New Hampshire. It's not right. He wanted to live up here. He wanted to have his children grow up here. That's about all I have to say. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to address the council tonight on a matter that is on tonight's agenda? No? Okay, we're going to move on to city manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You do have a financial and operational trends report in your packet tonight. I'm going to pass around a complete substitute for that. We had a couple of glitches. We had one sheet that printed microscopically, so I'm going to let these come around a little bit.
All new?
All new. Not the whole report is new, but there was enough in there, it just made sense to pass out a new copy for you. And I'll walk you through whatever changes that there were on it. want to start off with a little background on an item. As I think some of you know, that we implemented a new software program in the city clerk's office recently, and did some training, and that actually caused one of the small minor glitches in the report tonight. But the new program is called ClerkWorks, and we appreciate folks' patience a couple weeks ago when it was taking a little longer for us to process some registrations and train on it. But the advantages of having ClerkWorks in is, number one, is faster processing times. We're able to scan registrations and licenses with that, so it speeds up and cuts down the opportunity for any human error. We're able to email reminders for those who want them for dog license renewals. We get a much better support system. We can actually input our inventory of license plates and decals into the system to help us track that. And another item for other municipalities who use ClerkWorks, of which there are a number, there's a reciprocity system where if there's a parking ticket outstanding in one community and somebody comes in to register a vehicle under that software system, it can get flagged. So if somebody had an outstanding parking ticket in a community, you know, a Concord, a Manchester, or Nashua, and they go in to register, it'll flag Laconia parking ticket, it'll flag that, and that community would not allow the registration until the parking ticket is cleared up here, and we certainly would be able to flag parking tickets elsewhere. So ClerkWorks is trained. It's going to be a lot more efficient and offer a lot better service for our residents going forward. So the reason I share that with you is tied into the financial and operational trends report is, and I'll get to that in a second, under motor vehicles. I'll start on the first page. Our building permit report values were at $5.1 million assessing year to date. And again, the assessing year runs April 1 to March 31st. We're down a little over $2 million from where we were 2 years ago. We're down, we're down over $6 million from where we were a year ago, and about $2 million from where we were 2 years ago. So we are trending at a much slower building permit rate than we were over the past 2 prior years. We continue to be very busy in fire and rescue calls, as well as in police calls, which are on the top of page 2. We have taken over the operation and the billing of the ambulance, as you know, as of July 1. We do have a new billing company that we're working with. We're producing all of the reports, the data for input, if you will, for this company to go ahead and prepare the bills and go out and do the collection for the city. Donna and, is it John?
No. You mean?
Going down to...
Oh, Sean.
Okay, sorry, Donna and Deputy Sean Riley are going down to Derry later on this week, and Derry has used this collection company for a few years, so they're going to be able to work with the folks in Derry and understand how they produce reports and which ones are the most advantageous, and get some help from a peer community on how we can best present information to the City Council on what our billables and what our collectibles are. So hopefully for the September one of our September meetings, we'll start being able to present what our billables are, what our collection is. We know there's probably going to be anywhere from a 60 to a 90 to maybe even longer than that lag, so we're looking at options on how we track July billables and how quickly revenue comes in just for those July bills, and carry that as kind of a siloed number so that we can get a handle on what our collection rate is, what our collection time is, and that will help us make projections going forward. So very early in the process, but we are working a number of angles to be able to present appropriate information on the billing for the EMS. On the bottom of, towards the bottom of page 2, property tax collection, as I mentioned to you at our meeting in July, that property taxes were due in early July, so the numbers were complete. So now you can see we are well past the July collection date. We're running at 97% collection for the July warrant. So if you look back up through the years 2012 to 2017, we're running significantly higher than any of those years, and I attribute that to a strengthening economy. One thing that will be interesting to watch is the legislature this year did pass a bill which reduced the amount of interest that municipalities have to charge on overdue taxes. It used to be at a 12% rate at the first year, and it went to 18% for year 2 and year 3. And the thought to that is, the legislature had wanted to have municipalities be more or less in first standing. So if somebody had a choice of whether to pay off a high-rate credit card or pay their property taxes, there was incentive for them to pay that. Those numbers have been reduced, not as low as was originally proposed, but through an amendment and a compromise, the rate that we're charging now for the first year is going to be at 9%, and the subsequent years at 15%. So we'll have to track that a little bit to see what that may or may not end up doing to some of our collection rates, as people could say, well, I'm not going to pay my first year property taxes because the interest rate's only 9%. I've got more on a higher rate interest rate credit card, and I may choose to pay that down. So it's just something that we need to watch a little bit there. But we are at a very strong point with our property tax collection. So the motor vehicle registration, so that's one of those small glitches that we're working through on ClerkWorks. So when we switched over to ClerkWorks in mid-July, what it didn't do was segregate out that additional $5 motor vehicle registration fee and put it in the specific account. So when the initial report that came into your packet showed under that municipal transportation revenue for the month was only in the $4,000 range, we've had an aha moment and said, okay, we've collected more dollars. In theory, if it's a flat $5 per vehicle, that number should be higher. What happened? And we kind of looked through what happened on a certain date, and we'll rectify that in the financial software as to make sure it gets tracked properly. So that number is accurate. So you can see, again, for motor vehicle registration, a very strong first month, kickoff to the year, especially when you compare it to the prior years. The third page is the overtime. That was one that was printed very small in your original packet, so not that this is a huge font, but it's a little bit better, and this carries over to try to give you the 12 months on one page. So we'll be giving out magnifying glasses at the next meeting for you. On the very last page, you can see we've kicked over the new year on the impact fee revenues, so revenue year to date. Again, we started a new fiscal year, so you can see what rolled in the month of July and then where the current balances are. We did make another adjustment in the report as to the motorcycle week account, so we did reflect the finalized numbers that we have right now, and that balance did change. The very bottom of the page, the boat taxes, again, for whatever reason, we had a much stronger July boat registration, coming in at almost $14,000, which is far more than most of the years going back to 2014. So that's a positive sign as well. I do have motorcycle week numbers for you that the mayor had alluded to. We'll pass those around and kind of walk you through that a little bit as well.
Pretty much. I can change preliminary, but they're pretty much fine.
Yeah, these are pretty much final. There could be one small, outstanding something out there, but these are pretty much final numbers at this point. So what we have on the sheet, revenue up at the top, we had what we budgeted for the fiscal year 18, what the actual was in the fiscal 18 totals, and how that compared to fiscal year 17. So revenue came in almost spot on, but the one thing to point out is, as the mayor mentioned, we had Motorcycle Week trademark revenue this year as a new line item that generated $13,700, and where we were down was on our permits and licenses for the number of vendors that we had here. So we were down about 15,000 on the vendor license. We collected 13,700 in the trademark, and a little bit of small increases in the photo tower, in the site review numbers, and pretty much the revenue came out a wash. But again, with a caveat that there is a new line item in there for a revenue stream. The out-of-town expenses, we had budgeted 150, we came in at 142. What actually came in a bit higher this year, and I think I mentioned this a couple of meetings ago, was the in-house police, if you will, overtime was significantly higher than in prior years, and the out-of-town police was lower than in prior years. And that was basically, we had some challenges in finding some out-of-town officers to come in and work it. And also this year, we had very nice weather all the way through, and therefore we didn't cancel some of the shifts or cut people loose early in an evening if we had heavy rain because the weather was so great. So that's really the most significant change in what came there, and just with covering the overtime rate and the retirement system cost for our in-house police, that works out to be a higher per hour rate than some of what we pay for a flat rate detail for the out-of-town police. You can see in there about halfway down on the expense, Motorcycle Week legal expenses. You can see we hadn't budgeted anything for 2018 because it was something that came up after the budget was adopted and moving forward to trying to get these trademarks. We ended up spending a little over $3,000. We are continuing to spend some money right now because we are in the process of having to protect our trademark and go out and actively show that we're using it and enforcing the trademark. So even within some of the police overtime number here or the police budget number here, not a huge number, but some of that was for some details where we had an officer, go through in the vendors and verify that folks who were selling trademarked goods had paid for the trademark license. And it's not only that we have to address it here in Laconia, we've got neighboring communities, Meredith, Guilford, which can do it down to the track in Loudon. So there were several hours probably that shows up under police time that in reality was attributed to the enforcement of the trademark, and that's something that we need to do. Most currently, based on when some of these trademarks were initially issued, and I'll probably butcher some of the language here on the patent and trademark area, but you have to report into the trademark office every certain number of years and show that you are actively using the trademark. So right now we are in the process of actively showing that we are using Laconia Motorcycle Week and Laconia Bike Week on items like patches and small jewelry or lighters or tire gauges and those types of things. So we're having to get photographic evidence of something that shows year specific and work with our attorney, Mike Pearson, to be able to submit it into the trademark office to show that we're not just sitting on this, it's being actively used. The ones that are coming up for us in 2019 deal with clothing and T-shirts, and that'll be hopefully a much easier one to track down photos of than some of these others. But there will be some ongoing expense every year that we should be planning on budgeting for to keep the trademarks, number one, current, and to do the enforcement aspect of it. And I guess I would stop there, and I've got one more thing to bring up that doesn't relate to this afterwards, but I guess I'll stop here.
Let's while we're on the subject of Motorcycle Week, let's continue that thought, and we can come back to it, to anything else. If we write a check to the Motorcycle Week Association, what do we call that?
It would be a disbursement of trademark revenue to the Motorcycle Week Association. We would just put it out as a payable.
So in terms of a motion, what I'm looking for is a word.
I move to
What's the verb
approve the
here?
expenditure of a certain dollar amount to the Motorcycle Week Association as a portion of trademark revenue collected
All
would
right,
be
so
how I would do it.
I'm going to propose here to entertain a motion, and the net amount here is, we had $13,700 of trademark revenue. We had direct expenses, not counting soft expenses, of $3,037.50 for legal costs, so that's leaves a net of $10,662.50. What I'm going to suggest to the council is that we take into account that we had some soft costs involved here and round that off to an even number of $10,000. So what I would entertain here is a motion to have the city expend $10,000 of the revenue from Motorcycle Week to the Motorcycle Week Association out of the trademark funds. So anyone care to make that motion?
So moved.
Second.
Counselor Cheney, seconded by Counselor Hosmer. Any discussion? Counselor Lippman.
So if you go to the last page of page 5 of what the manager passed out in terms of expendable trust balances, we have just under 55,000 in the Motorcycle Week account. That would bring that down to 44,000. If we were to continue to operate on the same basis of the last year, we could do this 3 times and then we're done. I'm not against doing it in this, your motion or your suggested motion for this time, but I think we gotta have some planning around this Motorcycle Week fund because it's not working anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly, if we were using the old model this year, we would be
red 18
in the
now.
red another 10,000 bucks. So that calls into question, are we charging enough for permits, or what are, what other things do we need to do to fine tune that to try to get back in the black?
Yeah, 3 times 18 is 54. So that's,
Because yes, that 54 is gonna go down every year if this trend continues.
And staff has had some discussions post-wrap-up meeting that we haven't increased fees, and whether it's vendor fees or it's site fees or a combination thereof. We know how many, licenses we issue. It's in the area of 160-something, I believe. And, you could do some math and say if a vendor license was increased by so much, what is that going to generate? If site approvals and that type of stuff, inspections were, raised a little bit, there's a couple of ways that could be done. And we don't think that the legal expense, although in this case the motion was to net out the legal expense and do the different, we wouldn't expect the legal expense to be at that amount every year going forward once this is kind of solidified. But again, if the intent was to just back out whatever legal was and to provide the rest of the motorcycle week, the amount of legal expense, I guess, doesn't really have an impact on that.
On the other side of that equation, Counselor, is that, is that we have to think about too, is that typically in business, the answer to falling sales is not to raise prices.
correct. I mean, I think it's not for this particular meeting, but I think, if you look at the characteristic of the event and, the issues that were maybe present 2 decades ago, in terms of how we staff it and our expenses, I think, that's not, it's for the manager to work out with his folks, but I think clearly we got a long run issue here, and I think the representation you made, again, I support. I'll make the motion if we haven't already got the motion on the table, right?
We have a motion on the table.
Okay.
No.
Oh, then I'm
We have a
done.
motion on the table now to write a check to the Motorcycle Week Association out of the proceeds for $10,000. Counselor Hamel.
Yeah, just so everybody knows what we are doing for the Motorcycle Week Association, we're part of their board, which we pay, what, $5,000?
$5,000 a year.
Okay. Plus, we give them roughly 80 feet, I think, of boardwalk. So that's a sizable amount of money that we give them. So just want everybody to be aware of that.
Okay. May I play devil's advocate?
You can.
All right. So the other side of that equation is that this money that's now in our account has never been in our account before. It's always been in their account and part of their normal revenue stream. So if we keep the money, then we're taking it out of their revenue stream and putting it in our revenue stream. It's not like it's new money we're deciding where it's going to go. It's,
Well, maybe we can discuss the percentage for next year.
well, I think that's
If
open.
if we can't pay for the event, nobody's gonna have a revenue stream.
Well,
I'm sure Counselor Hosmer will have all this figured out as our representative to the motorcycle.
No doubt, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for your confidence. Look forward to reporting back on it. But, before, I think there's some things that we should perhaps take a look at future meetings, which is expense control here, and are we staffing it appropriately? And there seems to be some discussion about there's a flat rate for vendors, is that right, for a license? Regardless of how much,
Yes.
no matter how much space they take
It's
up?
not based on square feet.
So in some respects, there might be some creative ways to look at that wouldn't, that might affect how we stand here. But certainly, I'm all for making sure that this money goes to the Motorcycle Week, and I support it. I think the overall benefits, my understanding, are far outweigh the expenses here, but I think we can take a little closer look here and work in a collaborative fashion with Charlie and Jennifer to review some of these numbers.
Any other discussion? All right, call for a vote then. We have a motion on the floor to write a check to Motorcycle Week Association out of these proceeds for $10,000. All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, the motion carries. Thank you. All right, now we're back to general questions or comments for the city manager.
And I've got one last item that I can
sorry.
get after there's any questions. But the city played host, through the promoter, if you will, of the City on the Lakes Tri-Festival yesterday. The triathlon happened. And I spoke with Kevin Dunleavy today, and he was down there at the event. They actually had a 20% increase in number of people registered this year over the prior year. The number still wasn't huge, but it was 150 people. And, this isn't just a simpler walk, run. This is people who are swimming, biking and running, and the average times are an hour and a half to 2 hours. So these are fairly serious athletes who are out there doing this. I looked at the registrant list or the finishing list just to get a sense of where people came from. All 6 New England states were represented. Washington, D.C., New York had several people. There are people here from Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, and you can actually list if you're affiliated with a triathlon club or running club type of thing, and several of the folks from the 2 western cities I just mentioned are part of triathlon, groups out there. So certainly for them to be here for one reason or the other and talk about a good experience, it's minimal impact on our city staff, and the promoter does a really first-class job with timing and organizing and how everything does. So certainly want to thank them and do everything we can, I believe, to encourage that type of event to continue to grow here in Laconia.
What would you say, an hour and a half?
I think some of the elite ones maybe been a little under an hour and a half, and I may be misspeaking here, but I would be in the 2.5 to 3 to maybe 8 hour, and I might still be in the water.
And for me, it would be months. And that's assuming I had a good life preserver. All right, any questions for the manager? No? Okay, thank you. We're moving on then to new business. First item under new business is page 23 of your packet, counselors. This is a tentative agreement between the Laconia School District and the Education Assistance of Laconia. This comes to the council for final financial approval, and I have one change to make here for you. The proposed motion on this is on page 23 of your packet there, and we would need to add to that the monetary amount that we need to approve for the first year would be $82,234. So I always say this when we come, for the audience sake, when we come to approving these collective bargaining agreements, that the procedure the council uses may seem too opaque to the casual observer, and it is because the council has to vote to approve the financing of the project. The bottom line, in this case, $82,234, which is already included in the school budget for the fiscal year that we already approved. So this is not a new appropriation. We're simply approving the idea of spending that much more on labor within the school budget. But we cannot go beyond that in terms of public discussion tonight. Before we vote, all we can divulge is that we have been presented with the details of this contract between the school district and their educational assistance union. And we have been thoroughly briefed on the details of that contract, but we cannot make those public because we would be violating collective bargaining law if we did so. So we have to either, we just say yay or nay to the dollar amount at this point in time. If we approve it, then that finalizes the deal and the details can be released to the public. So a motion would be in order that the City Council approve the tentative agreement between the Laconia School District and the Educational Assistance of Laconia for the period of July 1, 2018 through June 30th, 2019, 3 fiscal years, with a first-year cost impact of $82,234.
So moved.
Councilor Hamel makes that motion. Is there a second?
Second it.
Seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and the City Council has approved that contract. I know Superintendent is with us tonight. Do you wish to add any comment for the public in terms of what this does for those, any of the details?
Very modest.
Superintendent Minahan?
It's good to see you all. Thank you very much for approving that. What it does is it gives all of the educational assistants and many of our secretarial staffs a modest increase. If I remember correctly, it's somewhere around 2% per year. And it also makes some slight changes to how many vacation days you get after a certain number of years, up to like 20 years working in the district. It increases those a little bit, and also changes how the staff that works full-time year-round takes vacation time. It actually makes it a little more manageable for the school district, because they'll break it up as opposed to taking like an entire month off or something. So again, thank you, and that was really it.
How many employees are covered by this agreement?
It's right around 120, maybe, somewhere around there. So, thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? No, you saw it.
Thanks for coming. All right, item B, under new business, is New Hampshire Municipal Association Legislative Policy Process. Well, there's a riveting title if I ever heard one. I know that this starts on page 24 of your packet, and I know that this was distributed to you by the city manager. Did you want to address this, Mr. Myers?
I can. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So full disclosure, I serve on the board of the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and I'm proud to do so and represent Laconia on that. And I appreciate your support for allowing me to continue to do that. So the legislative policy process starts back in the spring. There's basically 3 working groups that are brought together to come in and vet either suggestions, proposals, ideas that come in from various communities in the state about legislation they would like to either see us create or support or oppose. And the 3 general areas are general administration and governance. The second one is finance and revenue. And the third one deals with land use type of things, and I've skipped over it here quickly, so I'll find it for you in a second. So those 3 committees typically consist of somewhere around 15, 18 people. They go through and have significant conversations, discussions, debate about various proposals, and they bring forward a slate, if you will, for adoption. So they're broken up into the 3 categories. I think the third one is land use and zoning and planning type. Out of that, we have different levels of priority, and the different levels of priority deal with how active are we going to be in looking to go out and support these legislatively. So priority recommendations means the municipal association would go and actively try to seek sponsors and help craft legislation to bring forward. There are some standing policies that are on the books that are good to have, that in case certain pieces of legislation come up, we've got a position on that. And actually, I butchered a little bit. The first one is an action policy. The action policy is when we'll actually go out and do it. Priority is a second tier, and then standing are third tiers. Like we would oppose any cut in revenue streams coming to the community. We would oppose downshifting of costs. Those types of things might be in standing. So what happens is communities have an opportunity to take a position on this item as a package. If there's something here that Laconia City Council and the mayor said, no, we don't support number 2 on page 7, you could pull that, and then there's a voting delegate. So each community has a voting delegate, and that's listed in your packet. And it starts with the highest ranking elected official and runs through a list, and then ultimately could end up to a manager or an administrator to go in and be the voting advocate for the day. Typically about 80 or 90 communities come together at the policy conference in September. Each community has 1 vote, and the vote of the will of the municipalities that show up become the policy provisions that the New Hampshire Municipal Association will take up and action priority and standing positions and follow the legislative season, as it will, as it begins in January. anything that there may not be a specific policy on. And again, none of the legislative service requests, the LSRs, have been submitted yet. Those will start rolling in the fall by current House and Senate members. And please, Senator Hosmer, jump if I get anything wrong here. After the elections in November, newly elected folks also have an opportunity to submit the LSRs, the legislative service requests. And a lot of those items are just by title only in November and December. So you can look at a list and it might just say, you know, motor vehicle taxation. You don't know if they're looking to increase it or decrease it. It's just a simple title that's attached sometimes. So the process starts in January, where bills get assigned in the House and the Senate. Our staff through NHMA are working on it. A lot of local officials come down, like I know, Mayor Engler has and Councilor Hamel have on specific Laconia issues. I know Councilor Lippman has done it on issues in his area of expertise and work. So, those are the folks that the legislators really like to listen to, as opposed to a lobbyist or seeing the same faces there all the time. But this would kind of be the marching orders that are set by all the member communities. And then the NHMA board of 25 people from across the state, large and small communities, elected and appointed officials, are able to take positions on issues that may come up during the legislative session that aren't covered by a policy here. They're kind of that in-between board that can react to an amendment or a new piece of legislation.
And you've been our delegate, I presume?
I have been at the past, because there has not been an elected official who's gone down to the policy conference. But certainly, I think I fall like fourth in line to it. So any of the elected officials here, starting with the mayor.
Anybody want to volunteer to be the delegate this year?
There is light refreshment. I think there's coffee in Danish, if that entices you at all.
I'm expecting an overwhelming response to that request here. Counselor Bounds, are you standing in line?
I'll think about it, get back to you.
All right, so we have a motion the proposed motion on page 24 of your packet is to approve the recommendations that are before you tonight. If someone would like to make an amendment, meaning to exclude something that's in this document from that blanket endorsement, now would be the time to do so. In other words, you could make a motion to approve it minus item B on page 12 or something or other, if there's something specifically that you would like the city to take a position on that's contrary to what's in this document.
And I know I've spoken a lot, but if I could, Mr. Mayor, if you could turn to it's at page 10 of the policies or page 38 in your agenda. I'll just give you an example on some of the items, and maybe the folks at home here, and this is something that's just come up that Councilor Cheney brought up that he heard from a couple of constituents, but number 4 on the middle of that page is dealing with regulation of short-term rentals. So as to see if the NHMA will support legislation authorizing municipalities to regulate short-term rental of residential properties, including licensing requirements and health and safety protections. This should not be interpreted to limit existing authority to regulate such uses through zoning and land use. But again, this is dealing with the Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, and others, which is something that a lot of communities didn't anticipate and don't have in their zoning regulations right now. So those are the types of legislation. Again, you can see that one is a priority policy. So out of that particular committee, they basically said, this is one of the ones that we want NHMA to go out and be working with legislators to draft legislation that gives municipalities some ability to protect themselves and abutters on it. So they can be a little bit more broad in some sense. Some of these may be dealing specifically with towns, like, can a town appoint or elect a town clerk? Some of them don't necessarily apply to the cities in here, but this is a complete body of work. And I know the folks, there's probably about 75 people involved in this, and they really, they put a lot of effort into bringing these policies forward.
So I guess the question is, does anybody intend to make a motion tonight to exclude any item in this document from the blanket endorsement? No? All right, a motion be in order then to approve the New Hampshire Municipal Association legislative policies that are presented in the memorandum tonight, and to to authorize the city manager and representing the city to vote yea.
So moved.
Who said that? Counselor Ballens made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Counselor Haynes seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, the motion carries.
If you change your mind between now and September 14th and want to be the voting delegate, I'm happy to shepherd any
So
of you through the
where's the
process.
conference this year? Is it?
It's in Concord, that's the Municipal
Oh,
Association
not
building.
Las
It's
Vegas or
it's
something.
No, it's not a full conference, it's, you get to go to Concord.
We might have gotten some volunteers. I've been to Concord, thank you.
Don't want to go back.
All right, item C under new business, amendment of the Lakeport TIF budget resolution. That's on page 42 of your council, and I will recognize the city manager for an explanation.
Okay, so in wrapping up the budget year, we realized that we had transposed a number, and there was a typographical mistake for the amount that was going to flow into the Lakeport TIF account, and we had listed $4,951, and it should have been $7,981. So this technically is a budget amendment in the amount of $3,030 to increase the amount going into the Lakeport TIF district.
Any questions? Motion be in order to amend Resolution 2018-23 for the Lakeport Tax Increment Financing District to correct fiscal year 2019 appropriation of to $7,981. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Is there a second? Counselor Lippman seconds the motion. Any discussion?
I have a question.
Question. Counselor Lippman.
So just to be, for the public's benefit, mainly, it doesn't change the amount to be raised by taxes, correct?
Nothing at all, correct.
Any discussion, further discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. All right, we are on to item C, or D rather, which is another resolution, new resolution 2018-30, Railroad Corridor Study. That is on page 43 of your packet, and the actual resolution is on page 44. And I will recognize the sponsor of this resolution, which is Councilor Lippman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a number of months back, we had considered a resolution and, last fall, and withdrew it at that time and said that we would come back with consideration for another resolution. We've got some public comment on it already as counselors. We also got some clarification from the Department of Transportation that would suggest there's some obstacles to overcome in terms of maybe implementing something, but I just want to clarify, this resolution's about studying something and putting some information in the public sphere with respect to the value of the use of the railroad corridor as a trail, and we have a different financing scheme in terms of accomplishing the study of the trail, and that there would be no city tax dollars used in doing it, but that the City of Laconia would be the sponsor of it. The study, there are quite a few bullets here that I don't know whether introduce by reading the resolution or whether we need to do that.
I'm going to read the resolution.
Okay.
So you.
Sure. So
normally we move to skip over that because it's boilerplate kind of stuff. But since there's a lot of detail in here tonight, I think the public should know I'm actually going to take the time to read the resolution when we get to
Sure. So just to clarify, I think we want to get some information available to have a discussion, to have a public hearing on, to help inform the trade-offs. We heard in the earlier part of the meeting tonight a couple of different perspectives on it, and I think having a more informed discussion on it in terms of what position we'd like to take as a city with respect to this. It may require us to effect some changes in legislation to go forward with it if we chose at the end to do that. But I do think it's an important project for the city to have information on and to take input on, and would hope that my fellow councils would support this resolution.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor from Councilor Lippman. I'll read the resolution in a minute to adopt Resolution 2018-30 having to do with the railroad corridor study. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Councilor Hosmer seconds the motion. Thank you. All right, for the public's sake, then, let me read, and then we'll have discussion. Resolution 2018-30. Be it resolved, whereas the state-owned Concord to Lincoln Railroad Corridor was built to bring tourists and spur economic development in the Lakes region beyond circa 1850, and whereas a portion of this 50-mile corridor is now used under lease agreement with the state for certain train operations with a degree of benefit to the surrounding communities, and whereas there is an identified regional trail project from Weirs Beach to Franklin that could have the potential to yield significantly more economic and recreational benefits to the abutting communities, the region, and the state of New Hampshire by better utilizing this publicly owned space. And whereas the building of the remaining 10 miles of trail project in place of rail, would substantially reduce costs, alleviate abutter concerns, and provide an enhanced trail for users. And whereas the state-owned corridor would be maintained in perpetuity by the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, with the understanding that rail would be reinstalled at a future date if it was determined that rail was a better and higher use. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Laconia City Council endorses a proposal for the city to commission professional research to be paid for by the WOW Trail Committee to study the pros and cons of continuing to build this regional recreation trail next to the existing railroad tracks or in place of the existing railroad tracks. Questions the study should address would include: 1, how much would it cost to complete the entire rail project, plus or minus 10 miles, by building the path alongside the railroad tracks? 2, how much would it cost to complete the entire trail project, plus or minus 10 miles, by replacing the tracks with the trail? 3, what is the economic impact to the region and the state of New Hampshire based on the current use of the rail system? 4, what would the economic impact of the region and the state of New Hampshire be with a completed trail system from Weirs Beach to Franklin in place of the rail system? 6, what recreation, transportation, and health benefits might be realized from a completed rail trail from Weirs Beach to Franklin? 7, how would a completed trail system in place of rail impact the snowmobile community? 8, is it feasible for the current lessee, the Plymouth and Lincoln Railroad, to continue to operate tourist trains and maintain business with an interrupted line? And 9, if the current rail line was interrupted from Weirs Beach to Northfield to construct a trail, what impact would this have on tourism and future commercial rail uses? So that is a reading of the resolution that's on the floor at this time. So it basically says, to repeat, that the study that's being proposed here, it doesn't say this in the resolution, but my understanding is there's a general idea that it would cost roughly $50,000 to have this study done. So this is saying the city would commission the study, i.e. through the city manager's office, but all the expenses for the study would be paid for by the WOW Trail Committee. Discussion. Councilor Bounds.
I'll go first. I support this resolution, and I support it not because I think we should get rid of the railroad or we should change it or do anything. It's because, and this resolution doesn't draw a line in the sand in terms of what we're going to do with the property, how it's going to be developed, what the potential are. But it does identify important economic development points that will be useful in anybody analyzing what the WOW Trail is. Was it next to the tracks? Is it something else? So I support this proposal as it is, and I look to the language now, therefore be it resolved. In the last sentence, next to the existing railroad tracks or in place of the railroad tracks. So I'm very supportive of this particular resolution. Thank you, Councilor Littman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Discussion? All right. So we have a motion on the floor to adopt Resolution 2018-30. All those in favor, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative. The motion carries. Thank you. Now, related to this, on page 45, the next item of business is a request to authorize the city manager to apply to the State of New Hampshire Department of Transportation for a temporary use agreement in the city's name that will allow for the completion of a study concerning the different options and benefits of how to build Phase 3 of the WOW Trail and to sign all necessary documents in connection with the application and study. Now, quick explanation as to what this is about. Now that we have commissioned the study, once the city picks a firm to do the study, it's going to be necessary for that firm and/or its subcontractors to have access to the railroad right-of-way to make cost estimates and whatnot. And technically, that cannot be done without trespassing, without a permit from the Department of Transportation. So that's what the conditional use permit is. It's simply to allow engineers, et cetera, to access the rail line and not be trespassing in doing so. So this is a fairly routine piece of business that's required for this. It's a conditional use permit simply to allow the contractor and or its subcontractors to have access to the railroad right-of-way for purposes of conducting research.
And to my understanding, Mayor, that the letter that you received previously on this topic, that the Department of Transportation indicated they would approve such request.
I would. I don't think we have any reason to think they would not. We're simply asking their permission to be on the right-of-way. That's all we're doing by doing this.
Mayor, I'm sorry, did I misunderstand that letter? Didn't they say they would not participate if it was to replace the tracks? That was my understanding of what I read earlier today. If somebody read something different.
I read it, Counselor, that.
I didn't read it that way, but
I read it that that we would be able to do the study, but they wouldn't support removing the rail because current law wouldn't permit that. And that's when I was talking about earlier, just even with the study, there are other things that might have to happen. So the study isn't equivalent to building the trail.
I understand that, yeah.
Importantly here, and I think this is a point that gets raised continually and that we all need to understand completely, is that the policy that, if that's what it's called, the position that the Department of Transportation is taking publicly on this is in line with current New Hampshire law. In other words, they are charged with executing current New Hampshire law. And under current New Hampshire law, those tracks could not be pulled up in favor of a recreation trail. It's not legal to do so. So clearly, down the road somewhere, if this plan were to ever come to fruition, the legislation, enabling legislation, would have to be changed.
Don't say it that way. Don't say plan. If the plan were to remove the tracks, because that's not the purpose of the study. The purpose of the study is to study what we should be doing there, so.
Yeah, the purpose of the study is to compare the economic impact and cost and whatnot of the two possible directions.
Yeah.
Okay, so a motion be in order to authorize the city manager to apply to the State of New Hampshire Department of Transportation for a temporary use agreement in the city's name that will allow for the completion of the study concerning the different options and benefits of how to build Phase 3 of the WOW Trail and to sign all necessary documents in connection with the application and study. Someone make that motion, please. Counselor Haynes, seconded by Counselor Hosmer. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries as well. Thank you. Okay, that is it for new business tonight. One final item of unfinished business, and this has to do with the Motorcycle Week trademark license agreement with Laconia Harley-Davidson. And that is cover documents on page 46, and the copy of the proposed document is on pages 47 through 49 in your packet. And so basically what we have here, we talked earlier tonight about the trademark issue and whatnot. And this came up during the just completed Motorcycle Week of June, where the city was making the rounds, if you will, collecting licensing fees from both vendors, temporary vendors, and from bricks and mortar stores who were selling Motorcycle Week apparel with the covered words on them that are now in the city's name, and that included the Laconia Harley-Davidson store in Meredith. And so they were asked to pay $50, I think, is what the fee for bricks and mortar.
$100.
$100, I'm sorry, is what they were asked to pay, which they did to cover the 2018 rally. And then that triggered a discussion about the long-term collection policy and whatnot, and that company's contention that they have been selling Motorcycle Week apparel at their store for a lot longer than there was any trademark on the merchandise and whatnot. And so there have been discussions and negotiations back and forth, and the result of those negotiations was before you tonight for city council approval. In these 3 pages, I think fairly it can be summarized in saying that in return for them recognizing, them being Laconia Harley-Davidson, in return for them recognizing 2 things. One, the city's legal right to control those names on the given objects, the pens and pencils and pins and whatnot that the city manager alluded to earlier, plus clothing. In those 2 areas, that in legally recognizing that the city does have the uncontested trademark on those things. And then the second thing that they're in this contract that they are agreeing to is that we have, because we're the trademark holder, that we have some basic rights in terms of controlling the content and the way in which over the years those items are used, those words and names are used. And that is simply to protect us, nothing intended in the way of anything negative to what they are doing now or have done in the future or have done in the past, but simply to say that over a period of time, we want to establish the legal right to say, no, you can't put the words Laconia Harley-Davidson on a T-shirt that has an image that we strongly object to on it, something like that. That we have a central control over that. So in effect, what they're saying is that in return for them recognizing our rights to the trademark and our right to review, in a general sense, the taste of, et cetera, merchandise that they might sell with our words on it, they will pay us $5,000 now, and that we grant them a license for that $5,000 for 50 years, or $100 a year. So that's basically what the compromise is. So that's what the bottom line on all this legalese is here. 50 years at $100 a year, paid up front, $5,000 one time, and they recognize those 2 basic rights for us. Questions, comments? Councilor Hamel.
Scott, is that just for the merchandise inside the building, or does that also cover anything on their property, vendors on their property that might sell that trademark?
No, vendors would be separate. It's for their 2 physical store locations, one in Meredith and one in North Conway. And then if they were to relocate to a different physical address or sell those, then the license would stay with the physical property. But any vendors who might be on their property would be subject to having to get a license with us.
Comments, suggestions? Okay, motion to be in order to approve the attached Laconia Motorcycle Week Rally trademark license agreement between the City of Laconia and Laconia American Road LLC doing business as Laconia Harley Davidson, and authorize the city manager to execute all necessary documents. Counselor Hamel makes that motion. Counselor Cheney seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And that accounts for all of our public business tonight, except for council comments. Yes. Council comments. Councilor Cheney.
Mr. Mayor, I have several things, and I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time and place, but if I may. I'm aware of at least the beginning efforts of cleaning up around Pearly Pond. And I was hoping that at our next meeting, perhaps someone from either Parks and Recs or Public Works could tell us about the progress that's being made and what's being done. I've talked to somebody who's a contractor, does a lot of work with DES, who tells me it is permissible to clean out the underbrush. You can't cut down, or you can cut down, but you can't pull out trees and that sort of thing. We're rapidly losing Pearly Pond appearance-wise. And I'm hoping something can and will be done. The other thing that occurred to me subsequent to that is we're starting to lose the ability to see Opeechee at the Opeechee Park. If you look at the little cove where the beach is, where the picnic tables and that sort of stuff is up along the side, there's more and more growth growing up there, and it's getting almost impossible at this time of year to see the lake. And I was hoping something could be done about that, and perhaps we could get some sort of a description at the next meeting. I also wanted to ask or bring to the council's attention, a number of constituents have spoken to me, and I've recently spoken to the planning director and code enforcement folks, and I was discouraged, and I don't mean to in any sense disparage or complain about planning, because that's not my intent. But in the course of our discussions, one of the places that I was asking about, I was told had been a problem for over 10 years. A code enforcement problem for over 10 years. And it seems to me that that's too long to continually deal with a code enforcement problem. So I was hoping we could also have a discussion about that after hearing from planning and code enforcement about what we as a city can do to start making sure that codes are enforced.
So,
please.
Can I interrupt you for
Please.
a second, and then go on? So, just in terms of direction, we had that discussion during the budget process. In terms of when we had the planning director, we had a discussion about staffing, we had a discussion
Right.
about all that. So what was missing from that discussion that we need to have?
I think what's missing is the nexus between attempting to enforce the code and that in fact being done. Or put another way, I don't think we've legally, the director tells me they send letters, and I'm sure in most cases try to encourage people to meet the obligations, then inform them that they're not meeting the obligations and have to. But 10 years later, I think is too long. And so I'm hoping we can hear what needs to be done. Is there something the council needs to do to help them deal with these code enforcement problems?
Okay.
Does that?
Is that sufficient direction for you?
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead.
I spoke briefly with Councilor Husmer earlier. He and I are the two who have had the pleasure of spending an hour or two with the Public Works Director discussing unaccepted roads. And we are the two who will have to deal with the largest number of unaccepted roads. So, speaking for myself, I'd like to hear what the council can and should do going forward about these unaccepted roads. It seems inappropriate to me to talk about building a road up in the Weirs or wherever until or designing it and putting in sewerage and water and whatever until we've done something about the stuff we already have that hasn't been accepted for some reason. Some of these roads, the road that I live on has been there since the 1800s. Apparently the city has never accepted it. And I just want to know what plan we have to start accepting those roads. But beyond that, I've been approached by some folks, it turns out actually in Councilor Hosmer's ward, but nevertheless about Pendleton Beach Road to be exact. But those folks would like to know when the letters are going to come telling them what the conditions are, what they can and can't do, et cetera. I'd like to encourage Public Works and the city manager to get those letters out sooner rather than later, because I think as the winter starts to come along, those people need to know what we will and what we won't be doing. I actually was pleased with my meeting with the Public Works Director to find out what his plans are, but I think we should make the citizens aware of what those plans are as well. And sooner rather than later. And I know that may be a staff problem, but I think we ought to get a letter out quickly.
So, my apologies to the 3 new members of the council that I can't remember frankly when the last time we discussed this in detail was. I know certainly we did last year, but whether it's been since then or not, I don't remember.
No.
But let me ask the city manager a quick question here, and that is, in your mind, is there currently any ambiguity in terms of what might happen or not happen on any street that typically has been maintained by the city in terms of the winter of 2018-19?
I believe the only one that we are very clear on and have been communicating for many, many months now is the Pendleton Beach Road one. I think beyond there, we've identified some that I think the council is aware of that are private that we have been maintaining, but we are not taking the position that for this coming winter, we are doing anything different for those roads than we've done last winter or the winters prior to that. Pendleton Beach being the one exception where it was very clear, and I think it's clear in documents in their homeowners association, that the road is private, is never intended to be public, and I think that was a condition of the conveyance on the sale of it. So that one, and they do have a homeowners association, and we've been communicating with them.
And we have typically maintained it anyway, you mean?
Yes, limited. We plow it. We're not doing anything else beyond the plowing part of it.
So this, as the way it starts right now, then, the only road that we're not going to plow this winter that we traditionally have plowed is Pendleton Beach.
Yes, and we've been communicating with them for over a year, and they do have a homeowners association, so the thought was with a year's notice and having that infrastructure in place, they were in a better position to look at options that were available to them. But beyond there, we are not proposing to change any maintenance at all for this winter, and has been the policy in the past, we wanted to give as much notice as possible for any of these that we have the discussions on.
Is there something in writing that went out to the owners or to that homeowners association indicating what the responsibilities of the city, or the city will no longer take responsibility?
Yes,
for
we've been
plowing?
dealing with a key person or two over there as part of their homeowners group, so yes, we can get you a copy if you
I
like
would
that.
appreciate that, thank you.
Would the whole council like it?
Yes.
What was sent to them? Okay, we can make sure that we get that to you in the next day or so.
Thank you.
So then the question becomes, what's the long term? So the
Yeah,
short term is
it's-
nothing's gonna change except that one.
Yes, and I appreciate that. But I think, with all due respect, I think we ought to notify each individual in Pendleton Beach rather than just the association. I think they're entitled to that, whether, and I don't complain at all about the efforts that have been made. I think they've tried hard to keep everybody informed, but there are some people who were not aware of what we were doing. And I don't think it would hurt us to just send them a letter and tell them, this is what we've told your association. That's,
How many homes are we talking about there?
That's easy.
20?
How many, 20 or 30?
20, yeah. It's easy.
yeah. I just think in fairness, that
Okay, what else you got on your
the
list?
last thing
Last
is,
You started out with two things.
Yeah,
We're
but I
at five
said-
now.
hang on. The last thing, and the manager made a brief reference to it, is I was hoping we could get something from the staff about what we can do to deal with this Airbnb issue. One of my constituents tells me that on a particular weekend, they had 20 people living in a 2 or 3 bedroom house. And I think from a lot of safety perspectives and other things, that's inappropriate and probably, I think, very unsafe. I think there's some other issues that come up, like the parties leave on Sunday night, put the garbage out at the road, sometimes not in buckets, and it doesn't get picked up till Tuesday, except by the crows and the stray animals that are in the area.
Sounds like we're looking for a briefing from planning department in terms of what, if anything, is in the pipeline in terms of addressing this.
Right, and I would hope that we'd look at whatever ordinances we have for other hotels and motels and those sorts of places for people to stay, and see if we can, if we have ordinances that affect them, we could expand what we have to include.
Would I be correct in presuming that there have been internal discussions in terms of?
There have been, and in the case where with this particular one, I believe we're referring to was advertising that it could accommodate up to 20 people, and based on the square footage in the bedrooms, that's not its intended use. I know through our fire inspection services, we're going to be over in, touching base with the owners and talking about if you're advertising for that number of people, then we need to be having you install sprinkler systems in for public safety and those types of things. The noise complaints, the trash, those are certainly enforceable for ordinances that we currently have on the book. So there's a couple of things, but again, we've had some preliminary discussions with legal. I think I mentioned last time, there's some language in the Portsmouth zoning ordinance which Superior Court has ruled is valid and ruled against a property owner, but it was based on specific language that was in the zoning reg in Portsmouth, I believe, and basically validated a decision by the ZBA, didn't necessarily rule on the issue of whether or not the short-term rentals are an allowed use as a right of a property owner. So I think they took the narrow focus and did it. There's conversations about whether or not that case is going to be appealed to the Supreme Court, and I think the window is still open. I think it's 30 days that the plaintiff had in order to.
So are we anticipating then that at some point, planning department is going to be coming to us, or the planning board, with a recommendation?
If the planning department would be the one to initiate the recommendations, I think, and it could be tied into the zoning. Is that something that we want to prohibit out of, residential neighborhoods, but allow in commercial resort? Or what areas will we allow it, or try to make it so tight that it's not
I guess
allowed
the
altogether?
question, putting words in his mouth that the counselor might be asking is, how long is this going to take?
We can have some general approaches to you probably by September.
By September?
I mean, not narrowed down to language of here's how you could do it, but to get a sense of where the council is and allow the public to comment back on it so that we can craft some language, if that's the desire of the council, that meets your intent on, on a scale of 1 to 10, how loose or how tight do you want to go after this?
One of our 2 September meetings, we could be discussing.
And as I pointed out in your, NHMA policy, there's talk about regulating it at the state level so that everything's on, on a playing field, assuming that you, adopt certain language in your zoning ordinances. So.
Is that acceptable to you, Counselor?
Absolutely. Yes.
And I believe you were all copied on some correspondence that Attorney Fitzgerald had sent out by email.
Yes.
And in that, I think the neighbors that he is representing in some way had indicated to the property owner, or he indicated based on them, that they understand that there may be some bookings in place already they've committed to between now and Labor Day, and the neighbors were willing to kind of say, this is your mulligan, and we'll get through Labor Day this year if you've got bookings, but beyond that, it's time to change. So I think,
They're going
it's,
to take civil action, or at least the
yes.
threat of that.
So, but certainly, we can bring you a framework and get, guidance from the council, and then craft language with our legal counsel, depending on the desires of the council and public input.
All right, to summarize then, the counselor is asking at perhaps at the next meeting or the first one in September at the latest, to get a briefing from Parks and Rec having to do with growth, natural growth in and around Pearly Pond and O-Pee-Chee Cove. And the roads we talked about in terms of getting individual letters sent out to the 20 or 30 people that are on Pendleton Beach Road. And Councilor Hosmer wanted a copy of that letter that went out
We'll
as
get
well,
that to
right?
everybody. Yeah.
The Airbnb we talked about, and where did we leave code enforcement?
We'll put together some challenges, some things that challenge us in the process in code enforcement, whether it's not tight enough ordinances, whether it's court system, whether there's things, as Councilor Cheney brought up, that this council can adopt in language that enable us to do a better job with that. So we'll put a framework of what's working and what we're running into for issues.
Okay, good.
Thank you, sir.
So do you have a list too, Councilor Bowens?
He took every single thing I wanted to say.
Anyone else, council comments tonight?
Yes, I do.
Councilor Haynes.
I just want to thank Wes. I've gotten a number of complaints about Mile Hill, and Wes knows what I'm referring to. And the Department of Public Works is addressing that, so thank you very much for that, Wes.
All right. As I said earlier, we have now a need for a non-public session. I'll get to that in a second. And so we're going to have that non-public session. I do not anticipate any further business being discussed tonight under our regular session, public session, once we come out of non-public session. So once we do that, we'll adjourn, and then the Finance Committee will have a brief meeting following that adjournment. So now I'm going to ask for a motion to go into non-public session under RSA 91A:3, paragraph 2, item D, consideration of the acquisition, sale, or lease of real personal property when, if discussed in public, would likely benefit a party or parties whose interests are adverse to those of the general community. Can I have that motion, please? Councilor Hosmer, second. Councilor Haynes. Would ask that the clerk please call the roll, yes or no.
Counselor Cheney?
Yes.
Counselor Bounds?
Yes.
Counselor Whitman?
Yes.
Counselor Haynes?
Yes.
Counselor Hamel?
Yes.
Counselor Hosmer?
Yes.
Mayor Engler?
You're getting as bad as I am.
I know.
Yes. All right, we are in non-public session, and we'll need to clear the room, and appreciate everyone's cooperation.